Gather round, travelers. Today we journey with Washington Irving. In the bosom of one of those spacious coves which indent the eastern shore of the Hudson, at that broad expansion of the river denominated by the ancient Dutch navigators the Tappan Zee, and where they always prudently shortened sail and implored the protection of St. Nicholas when they crossed, there lies a small market town, or rural port, which by some is called Greensburg, but which is more generally and properly known by the name of Tarrytown. This name was given, we are told, in former days by the good housewives of the adjacent country from the inveterate propensity of their husbands to linger about the village tavern on market days. Be that as it may, I do not vouch for the fact, but merely advert to it for the sake of being precise and authentic. Not far from this village, perhaps about 2 miles, there is a little valley, or rather lap of land among high hills, which is one of the quietest places in the whole world. A small brook glides through it, with just murmur enough to lull one to repose, and the occasional whistle of a quail or tapping of a woodpecker is almost the only sound that ever breaks in upon uniform tranquility. Well, today we are going to break into the uniform tranquility of this beautiful region to speak with my guest, Jason Grauer, who is the Senior Director of Farm and Innovation at the Stone Barns Center. You all may be familiar with Blue Hill at Stone Barns, the very famous and very deservingly famous restaurant in the Hudson Valley of New York. Dan Barber being the chef there, who also authored the book The Third Plate and who has inspired chefs, eaters, and farmers the world around with his commitment to deliciousness at every level. So today we are speaking with Jason about all of the really fascinating work that they're doing at the Stone Barns Center, which is very, very interesting for those of us who are interested in market gardening or farming in general, because their financial model, their approach, and their sort of nonprofit status search and ways of approaching farming systems that I think we can all appreciate being independent operators and unable to sometimes foot the bill for that kind of R&D ourselves. So without further delay, let's get into my interview with Jason Grauer.
Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. Today's episode is also brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are designed and built in Italy, where small-scale farming has been a way of life for generations. Discover the beauty of BCS on your farm with PTO-driven implements for soil working, shredding cover crops, spreading compost, mowing under fences, clearing snow, and much more, all powered by a single gear-driven machine that's tailored to the size and scale of your operation. We have been using a BCS tractor on our farm since 2014, and it has saved the day and leveled the workload more times than I can count. And I find new ways to employ it every single season. To learn more, view sale pricing, or locate your nearest dealer, visit bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com. To learn more, view sale pricing, or locate your nearest dealer, visit bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com. All right, enjoy the show.
Jason Grauer, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me today. I know it's a busy time for everyone who's in farming, but especially for you because you don't get any breaks.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and thinking of Stone Barns for this episode.
Well, I think people think about stone barns for lots of reasons, including the beautiful book that Dan put out and just kind of it being one of those places that everybody would love to eventually get to experience. I have had the pleasure of visiting the property and it's extraordinary. It's a real unique spot on earth. So, before we get into the specifics of what you're doing there, would you tell us a little bit about you and how you've come to be doing what you're doing, what your background is, and how you landed this pretty excellent situation?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, it's definitely a privilege to work on these grounds and to work for this organization and in collaboration with Blue Hill. So Stone Barns, the nonprofit farm and research center, and Blue Hill, the for-profit restaurant. And we're both innovating and working together on this mission-driven approach. This place, Stone Barns, means a lot to me because it was actually where I got my start. So I think I'm approaching this career in agriculture, which is now getting close to 15 years, really with being a transplant to this work. So I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in New York City and in the suburbs outside of New York City. And so I bring this up because my beginnings were I was very, very green getting into agriculture. And I think that's important because I'm realizing now after 15 years of being in it, like most people, it seems, in this country are that way, that we're not this agrarian society we once were. And so much of that idealism is what's driven many of us to go to that work or go into this work. But so all that to be said, for me, it was knowing really nothing about food and agriculture other than, food comes from stores, right? Like that next place that did not resonate with me because I never thought to ask the question, which is a fascinating and somewhat embarrassing thing to even admit now, but just an honest place close to New York City that I could go visit to ask questions about a farm. About farming, about agriculture, about growing, about anything. I mean, literally, it was that much. So for me, the first farm I visited was Stone Barns. I definitely didn't think I'd be here 15 years later working in this capacity. But it's been a very interesting winding road for me of following momentum, mentorship, and opportunity. And I think that's a really amazing thing that agriculture in this moment can offer people, because there isn't a clear, and it's even different now than 15 years ago, but there isn't a clear way to go and learn how to farm if you're used to or working or living in these kind of traditional educational systems. Like there are some bits of it, but even the land grant universities, they don't have tracks to become like a small scale farmer or market gardener. I mean, there are some amazing institutions out there, but they're few and far between. So for me, I went through kind of the first, let's say, actually, it's funny. It is kind of a half and half. So the first half of my life went through this traditional path of traditional education and traditional learning. And it didn't give me a knowledge base on how to do things or how things work. It gave me kind of a pathway to understanding how to get grades or how to kind of achieve certain goals, but not necessarily have any learning. So agriculture was my first step into understanding things from a learning standpoint. There was no real success marker other than the understanding and the ability to apply the skills directly the next season or later that season. So all that to be said, I truly feel like I've learned by apprenticing, through mentors, and through following this momentum of following people that really inspired me, and also their communication spoke to me. Their ability to answer questions and to farming, right? So, planting beds, creating beds from the smallest scale to, even to the level of plant breeding and genetics, which is something else I've gotten very into over these last years, and learning directly from incredible plant breeders. So it jumped around a little bit, but that's kind of been my journey, is actually starting and then learning through question and answer and experience and kind of endless hours of practicing to be able to get to this place of understanding.
Just to go back to that, kind of moment where you really switched gears, I'm assuming you didn't just like walk up to Stone Barns and be like, hey, can I ask a bunch of questions? I mean, what was that like? And what was that? I mean, is it still like that? Can people still engage in that way? Or do you feel like you were just like really in the right place at the right time?
For me, it was actually a friend. I didn't even know about Stone Barns or Blue Hill at that time. I was working in a corporate environment in New York City, and a friend of mine was exploring this possibility during the global economic crisis when there was a lot of interesting alternative thinking going on in terms of um, business, in terms of career paths. And so some of these really interesting talking heads on TV were talking about agriculture and the importance of it during this global economic kind of collapse or unfolding. And so I followed, just a curiosity to say, hey, yeah, I'm interested in learning about these things as well. And so for me, Stone Barns is a place that is here to offer the public a look inside regional and local agriculture. It's a place that is available to a casual diner, a hiker in the Rockefeller State Park Preserve, a local resident of Westchester, or a high-end, foodie looking for one of the great experiences of eating in the world. It's this whole spectrum of people that are actually engaging in what we're calling this community here. If you look at Rockefeller State Park Preserve, which Stone Barns is partially nestled in, they list roughly 400 plus thousand visitors a year to visit the park, and in turn will inevitably set foot on part of the farm at Stone Barns, if not the main campus. So it's a place where everybody can have that kind of an experience if they find their way here. So for me, I still think we embody that. And being public facing allows us to engage with people and creates this responsibility from the highest executive here to the entry level farmer, is that the point is to engage the public, to change the food system, and to do that through this sharing of information. So everybody knows when they set foot on campus to work here that you open yourself up to those that come in. And of course, for me, every time somebody reaches out, I have this feeling of like me being in their shoes. And what if I didn't say yes? I mean, because the people that opened their homes literally and their arms and allowed me in was the difference maker for me to be able to get into this work of agriculture.
It is such a unique and special place and model. And so it would be great if you could, for those who haven't been there or aren't familiar with it, have never heard of it, could you try to paint the picture of, not only where it is and what you're doing, but just all the different things you guys are doing there. It's a very special, and I mean this with a lot of respect, a very privileged situation because of all the different things you're getting to engage in. So give us the lowdown.
I'll give you the rundown, and privilege is definitely an important point to put out right in front. And again, for me, I feel very privileged to work here in this very, very privileged space. When you're driving through Westchester, there are some incredible natural landscapes that still exist that other suburbs in and around the New York area don't have. The care for the natural landscapes in Westchester is incredible, but the Rockefeller State Park Preserve and then Stone Barns have done something absolutely incredible in this expansive preservation of the natural landscape. And so that privilege to be able to enter into this space. So the whole park preserve and Stone Barn space is 1,800 acres. That's a significant amount of space on the East Coast, I'd say, to be able to go and engage and kind of like transport into this beautiful, natural, and cared for environment. Then if we get a little narrower into the Stone Barns orbit, we have a nonprofit organization, the Stone Barns Center, that was established. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary. So established in 2004. And when Stone Barns was established, a partnership was established right from the beginning with Blue Hill, which created Blue Hill at Stone Barns. So on this campus, you have this nonprofit farm education center, research center, and you also have this food service, and you have this high-end dining. You have events like weddings and conferences that take place here, and you also have the what I view as kind of our bread and butter right now, which is the intersection of these two worlds. You have this highly thoughtful and highly artisan and high quality culinary going on. And you have the same on the other side of agriculture, this high quality, high intentionality in agriculture. And they're working together. so that all the experiences at Stone Barns, for the most part, have some overlay of this kind of, call it culinary aspect and this agricultural aspect. But those are really proxies. So agriculture often is the proxy for the ecological, the environmental, the climate, thinking about all of that end of the spectrum. Whereas the culinary is also really the entryway for people. It's actually representing the demand side of things. It's representing the cuisine. Cuisine really calls to culture, and this exploration of culture, or what is culture, or the cultures that are around us that we can then engage with to try to understand a food system. And so you have the supply and demand at play, working together to push and pull each other to try new and interesting things. And really, the way I would describe it is, I don't mean to belittle it with this term, but it's just, I grew up as an athlete for another half of my life. And the idea of a game, I actually take quite seriously. But in a game, there's a set of rules. Those sets of rules are agreed upon by the participants. And those rules define the way you engage, the way you achieve and reach for championships and success and fun, and all these things that happen are all shaped in those rules. And the way I look at the work that we're doing is that we're actually trying to work together to change the rules of our food system. Because if you create the right bounds, then the creativity and expression and culture can come out of it. Because we feel that the current rules of the game of our food system are not strong enough. These rules are actually not serving us as a region. They're not serving us as a country. They're not serving us in the global environment either. So how can we change the rules of the game so that things like the use of synthetic chemicals, things like, using ingredients that are out of season in a region, that those become exceptions that are needed for a rule rather than just the rule itself. So we work on that here, and we do it together. And the concept that we want to bring to the surface is not something that is just one-sided. It's not like, well, this is, a great agricultural practice that we need, and nobody knows how to take that, let's say, that ingredient or that practice and put it into place. So we're saying, well, let's bring everybody together, bring the supply and demand side. So one simple way to look at that is an ingredient. Bring an ingredient that is important to a region to the table, and have the instruction manual of how to grow it properly, how and when to grow it, and then also how to use it and eat it. Because what's so fascinating, and I'm an example of this, is our cuisine in, let's say, the Northeast, our culture, our food culture in the Northeast is very mixed. And so there's not a singular culture. There's not a singular understanding of how to use ingredients and what ingredients to use. So there's all these, quote unquote, novel ideas that are out there, but they're not brand new 2024 ideas or 2004. These are pulling from the world, the incredible, like if something's here, it has made it here. It is not just showing up out of nowhere. But we need to kind of use the tools of the past to kind of understand where it is we want to go in the future. So that's what we're maybe that's a little philosophical, but that's what we're playing with here, is how to understand and celebrate this region and create a cuisine and a culture that supports the integrity of food production.
I mean, I love that. And I also think that the way that the center describes its mission is through this narrative of a vision, of a situation in 2050. And I wonder if you could talk to how you see what you're doing right now in service of where you want to be in 20, or where you want sort of things to be in 2050, because I do feel like it's a very ambitious thing, and with very ambitious goals, but it is the torch that we need right now, because there, as you say, are traditional institutions and how entrenched, sort of more conventional agriculture has become. We won't break that trend without torchbearers, but it's a very significant, I guess, not burden, but it's a very significant and ambitious goal. So would you talk a little bit about that and how you see, this very inspirational work that you're doing, making cracks in, the big shell that we're confined in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting to even hear the question, and hopefully I can put this together clearly. But let's start with let's start with the original intention behind Stone Barns for a second, which was, there was an original vision where we would be training the next generation of farmers. And in doing so, would give the next generation of farmers, so that, the kind of the typical statistic that is thrown out there is the average age of a farmer in the US at the time was like between 58 and 60, depending on where you were. And I think that's changed slightly in the last 20 years. But this idea that the next generation of farmers needs tools in the for-profit sector, as farmers, as individuals, as entrepreneurs, as pillars of their community, they needed tools to be able to farm ecologically, let's call it. Farm in tune with nature, as some people have called it. Farm organically or sustainably, as those terms were used for a while. And the biggest thing is all those terms and all those concepts, they only mean so much in each moment of time. And they need to be redefined because we need to see what the reactions are societally to these terms. And so we wanted to train the next generation of farmers. And what happened is that as we were putting ourselves out there and training people, there's something that I think the world, or this farming world, especially in this country, have kind of come around to, is that a 6-month or 4-month or a 9-month apprenticeship or time on a farm, that's not the essence of becoming a farmer. The essence of becoming a farmer is staying in place, building a relationship to a piece of land and understanding it through the rotations, not just once, but to see it over many years and understand how you learn to adjust, because the whole thing is adjustment. And so what I think is important there is, so this idea that we're going to train the next generations of farmers and then we're going to send them off into the for-profit space and they're just going to be able to function. The real issue is just how complicated and challenging it is for a farmer to make it today in the US, let's say. Okay. So the reason I bring that up is the pressure for innovation, the pressure for the solution, and the pressure to get the market to understand the true value of these farmers putting it into the land. It's too much pressure to put on these single farm businesses that have some of the lowest margins in all of businesses in the US. They're probably worse than restaurants. So here we have both of those industries
and that's
together.
saying something.
And that's saying something. So the point is that it's a lot of pressure to put on in resources, right? That's how this country was built, and the land grant system that was such a pillar of our country's evolution and success agriculturally, was related to supporting these farms of these regions. What we've recognized is that the tools, infrastructure, education, the knowledge, all this stuff that's out there in the US is not serving the small farmer. And it's definitely not serving an ecologically minded small farmer. And honestly, it's really not even serving a kind of small to mid-sized farmer. The majority of the infrastructure, resources, intelligence, advancement, technology is all serving the largest scale agriculture. And so those tools need to be available to small farmers so that it's not all on the small business owner. It's not all on this young entrepreneur or this whatever entrepreneur to solve it all. Because mostly we're finding farmers that are not just like in clusters in rural communities, but you find them like these farms, like newer farms, like what do you call it? Spotting up in areas closer to city centers, right? To be able to actually make enough money to justify starting the farm in the first place. So the point is that so much is stacked against these farmers. And so for us, if we want to envision a more agricultural society here, one that respects the seasonality all throughout the different regions of this country and can hold reverence for farming as a career, well, we actually need a bigger shift first. And we need institutions and we need investment that's audacious. And we need it to be, in many ways, irrationally passionate towards this goal. And it needs to interconnect to everybody so that people, the consumer, the eater, they understand that the actions that they take are intersecting with this food world, that they can't just make a choice to skip over their local farm for a cheaper farm that's 3,000 miles away. So in order to do that, our vision is to not just focus on churning out farmers in a privileged community and then expect them to just make it on their own, but to build a culture that can support the vision and the future that brings farmers into being pillars of their communities. So then to give you some specifics, I mean, this is why what we're doing is actually focusing on research that is collaborative. So that collaboration can be many things, but it's like farmer, chef, scientist, or, ways to validate the work of the agricultural choice, let's say in an ecological or in a quantitative way, so that the things that we quote unquote know, these things of ancient and traditional agriculture that many regenerative farmers are applying, that actually speak a language of the modern moment, which is, okay, just because people may believe that food can be healthier coming from their local farmers market doesn't mean that people are making that choice if it's more convenient to just go to a large scale market that has organic produce available. So we're saying, well, what if we actually compare those? What if we actually dive in and understand, like, what is the implication of these agricultural practices that we're calling regenerative? And not to say we want to like label it or define it in that term, but we want to understand it. And then that understanding, if it can be quantitative, then you can turn it into a qualitative understanding. You can turn it into something tangible that people can speak to and understand. So that's what we're working on, is that we want to say, today we want to invest in understanding why these systems work so that tomorrow they are the systems that are being implemented.
Would you like to give us an example of just one of the things that maybe you're personally most invested in or have had a deep hand in or something? I mean, just to give people a sense of what that really looks like in a practical sense.
So something that comes to mind is we have an ecological monitoring department, which is an investment, again, that you can't expect a for-profit farm to invest in an ecological monitoring department that's going to be researching the impact of those agricultural practices. That's a lot of weight to put on a small business owner. So we are investing in an ecological monitoring department that is observing things like soil health, or monitoring and doing data collection and analysis of long-term data collection and analysis of soil health, which is a cornerstone of all this incredible farming movement that we're seeing now. Is these integrated, rotational, seasonal systems have healthy soil, and healthy soil is the backbone of a healthy society. And so we say, okay, well, people have been saying that for a really, 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 really long time. So how is that not being implemented in our industrial system, or how is that not being mandated in our food system? It's not at all. And so we're saying, okay, well, then we need to define the impact as it's different in these regenerative systems than in those industrial systems. And so soil health is an important metric to be understanding. And everything that goes into soil health, such as microbiological activity and carbon sequestration, which I look at as like two opposite ends of the spectrum, even though they're interconnected. So then we have water quality. So how is the farming we're doing here at Stone Barns affecting the water that surrounds us? Biodiversity monitoring, the bird habitats, the insect habitats. How is, over time, this agriculture, how is it either positively influencing these biodiversity metrics, or is it negative? And again, this isn't like, sure, we have the hunch, we quote unquote know it works, but it's really about the long-term investment in understanding what works means, and being privileged enough and thoughtful enough to say, if it's not working, we change. So we're investing in an ecological monitoring of our farming system so that over the course of the next 50 years or 25 years, we can prove what the impact is of farming in this way.
And in those efforts, I know that you collaborate with university scientists and try to get that, the validation in place, because it is how people move based on proof. Even if we know and we see what we see and we know what we know, we, for whatever reason, have to have it in millions of journal forms that no one ever actually reads. And so
nobody ever reads, right?
Yeah, right. But it is the system. And so when you are talking about doing a particular application experiment, trying out a cultivar of a, let's say, a potato that would grow in a different climate or be more resilient or whatever that looks like. What's the process of, kind of setting something up? Do you guys all gather around once a month and talk about, how does that work?
Yeah, it's an amazing reality, because as much as we like to have what most farms do, which is like their winter planning session, the reality is when you put out a beacon of light like this for collaboration and separation from what is currently being funded in our food system, there's all sorts of people that are going to come out and want to be a part of that. So there's a lot of us sitting down, and usually we're sitting down, the farm and the kitchen sitting down, because what I think is unique about Stone Barns and Blue Hill is when you sit down at the table with the chefs, you're not just sitting down with a culinary understanding, because that restaurant has been steeped since even before day one of Stone Barns in a regional cuisine, in understanding the farmers. Why? Because we have a premise here, which I think most people agree to, which is that deliciousness starts in the soil. Deliciousness is related to the way things are grown. So anyway, the restaurant comes to the table with the same mission that we have. And so their understanding comes from the fact that they are being supplied by, I don't know the exact number, but as many farms as possible in the region. So Stone Barns, the farm, is trying to collaborate with other farms and help other farms in the region, and is not just is supplying to Blue Hill, but Blue Hill isn't exclusively buying from Stone Barns. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand, that actually the whole premise here is not to show that this closed loop farm to table system is all you need, because that's not a model that people can follow. It's actually that the whole point of this place constantly, we joke, putting Stone Barns out of business in certain crops that we find, because we pass them on to a farmer that is then going to grow them in their operation. So anyway, that system, that is kind of like a satellite that's out there. There's all these farms working with Blue Hill. Stone Barns had been training people. They're going off to working on other farms. And just like the general idea that we're looking in our region for all the players, all the incredible people that make agriculture possible. So that's like, I'm just saying kind of both sides do this together and separately, but it's understanding who are the plant breeders in New York. Well, what's our land grant university? It's Cornell University. So then as we sift through over 20 years, all the staff of Cornell and all the departments looking for the beacons of light of those that actually want to think in this other way, there's so many people that get excited about that. So it starts with, one request, and then it snowballs into 20 years of relationship building, and then people that have trained, let's say, at Cornell for an amazing plant breeder like Michael Mazurek, a name that has come up a lot for us, and somebody who has really helped shape a lot of what we do. His students have then gone on to work for small regional seed companies that then become collaborators independently of him with us. So there you can see that, we worked with Cornell University Plant Breeding and Genetics. After a number of years, we ended up working with Johnny Selected Seeds Plant Breeding Department, because some of Michael's students went and worked there and brought that ethos that was created together of deliciousness starts in the soil and deliciousness starts with genetics in combination. And so then all of a sudden you see the network builds. There are times where we reach out to other public institutions. There are times when they reach out to us. And so it's a mix of this kind of beautiful referencing and recommendations and exploration.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud sponsor of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. Since 1973, Johnny's has supported farmers and gardeners with superior seeds, tools, and information to help ensure their growing success and help feed their communities and families. The research farm is at the heart of Johnny's, where they trial thousands of varieties and tools every year. Their breeding program uniquely focuses on introducing varieties that meet the needs or solve the challenges mixed market, small farmers, and avid gardeners face. Visit johnnyseeds.com for innovative new varieties and time-tested favorites to grow this season. You can also browse their online growers library, link in the description, for a wealth of free educational resources. The employee owners at Johnny's look forward to growing with you. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not spend my time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, or maintaining web stores. If I could spend less time on my phone and computer and more time farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of the admin, managing orders, customer communications, and automating tedious tasks so you can get back to doing what you love. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers 6 hours a week. That's 6 hours you could spend with your family, out in the field, or simply taking a breather. So, what would you do with an extra 6 hours? Now's the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show.
I really appreciate what you said about the kitchen and the farm, sort of being two sides of what's driving, the engine of everything that you're doing, and how it's, kind of sending these spokes out into the world to make change in a different way. And I wonder, how critical do you think it is? Because I've worked in kitchens, putting myself through. I think there's this perception, and it's fueled also by, TV shows like The Bear or whatever, where you have this iconic chef, and at a very high level. I mean, this is food that, let's just face it, like most people aren't going to be able to eat the food. But
absolutely.
The idea that it actually really matters that there are people out there for whom, perfect is not the enemy of the good. It's like perfect matters because it happened without us, and we managed to make it lesser, and yet it's still possible. And actually not just still possible, but it would even be accessible if we embraced this idea that it's the foundation, as you speak to, this soil health foundation that allows for perfection to be achieved, even for those who are not dining at Blue Hill, but for those who are just in their backyards growing their own tomatoes. And that finding that again is actually maybe only possible because we have celebrity icon chefs right now. I mean, I don't know. There's definitely other ways, but I think there's something to that.
I think so. I think let me know if this is going in this direction that you were speaking, because if this is too roundabout, let me know. But it makes me think of this, that I think the perception of society is a little bit off in terms of I hate to use the term blame, but there's a funny thing where I think the wrong groups are being pinned against each other. That I think one thing that often gets talked about is that small scale agriculture or farmers markets are prohibitively expensive. That is probably true. That is true for many people, maybe most people. But it's not the farmer's fault that is the way, because those prices, for the most part of the farmers, if they're really farming with integrity, are probably not covering all the costs they need to have a great life. And so the people that can't afford this produce that's grown with such integrity, and the people that can't actually really afford to produce it, are pinned against each other. There's no pathway for them to work together unless there's a transaction that takes place. And that to me is the biggest tragedy, because it should be the farms and the people that are working together. But instead, there's something in between, which is where people who can't afford food can access it, which has removed them from this relationship to the farms, remove them from a relationship to food produced mostly in their locale and their region. And that is a whole tragedy in of itself that is probably at the root cause of all of these challenges. So that to me is something that really needs to be worked on. And I bring it up because when you look at a restaurant like Blue Hill, you can look at it from the entryway to the fancy diner coming in, right? In a restaurant that's, out there looking, being ranked as one of the best in the world. Or for those that are on the ground, you can look at it from the back end, which is all these incredible people that are looking for an opportunity to learn this craft, right? And it's the same thing with the farms. Like, the farmers that want to learn this craft and be able to have the freedom to be able to explore and use these ingredients. If you go to your average restaurant, you're not going to have the opportunity to use these seasonal ingredients because, again, the wrong people are pinned against each other. The restaurants mostly can't afford all of this seasonal produce. So then the chefs, the young local chef or the young kid who wants to go and learn how to be a chef is not getting to start by working with those local ingredients. So in there lies a challenge, which is why you end up in this kind of mess. But it is an opportunity to use places like this to engage people.
And do you think that the biggest opportunity with what you're doing there is how you can bring in people who historically don't have that connection and give them, it's like, teaching a person to fish or whatever, give them the tools to be able to engage with food in a very personal way and recognize that there is a scale. It's kind of the personal scale that really does work for everyone, and you don't have to have much. But if you do want to make a living at it, the system is still fairly prohibitive in that way, as you say. And I think you articulate the divide very well. I mean, it's interesting. I really appreciate that you identified those two groups of people, because this is the Market Garden podcast. And it is true that the quality of life for the people who are growing the most beautiful and intentional food is very hamstrung by the margins that they can get for their arguably fairly expensive food. And the people who really need that food the most can't afford to buy it. And so I do appreciate what you say. And do you think that, that is your point of agency with that?
I think the kind of very philosophical side of seeing it play out differently is that if we have a common language, if these ideas of how to cook properly and how to grow food and how to respect the land around, if these things become ubiquitous, if they become second nature again to us, then I think everything takes care of itself. Now, again, that's the philosophical side. That's not as tangible, but you can see that, 15 years ago, the way people were talking about food, and even if you look at the market share of a place like Whole Foods, was very different then than it is now. So I think there's a part of it that is the faith-based side. It's the part of it that's if you can if you can empower a culture to arise, if you can empower an understanding to arise, then we don't know what the future will be, but we know that if it's steeped in this understanding, if the rules change, then that will be the baseline from which everything else goes. And we're already seeing examples of that. It's so many businesses now showing up. So many things are talking about, plastic bottles that mention what's not in that plastic bottle. There's a possibility for it. You can see it. People want to put a social consciousness to their products and to their businesses, even just to get started. But we're not there yet. Anything we see now is not where we need to go. That's a very generalized statement. Many of the things we see now are not where we want to go. They're foreshadowing of that it is possible if you change the baseline. And I think we're a small operation. And when we often get asked the question of what does success look like? Or the other question that I love and I hate at the same time, which is well, how are any of these ideas going to scale? So many people want to come in and just start with that. It's when's your, product going to be available everywhere, or these things, or this won't work because you can't see the scale. It's of course. The reason this exists is because it is not scalable right now. And so we have to explore, or the way I describe it is we need to define truly what it is we want to scale and then figure out how to scale. But if you scale it with the wrong rules to the game, then you end up in the same place we're in now, right? And so to define that better is, well, if the economics are all that matters, then what you scale is going to go to what matters most, which is the bottom line. That'll appease the investors. That'll give you the most opportunity. I mean, I get it, but it's also but if there was another layer in there, which was the rules of this game, the ecological rules, this understanding, this baseline, well, then it would change the outcome. And so I think we're really invested in that side of it. Is Don't scale right away, because that's how you can prove your success in the short. If in order to do that, we have to sacrifice the integrity of what it is we believe, well, then that's not the right starting place. And there are many things I think that can scale, but we have to be methodical in that approach. And I think that's what we're doing. And there are some great examples of it. Alumni from these organizations that have gone on to do things that, they just felt like, I don't want to do what Stone Barns is doing, because I want to be able to affect more of a community where I'm at, where people can't afford that. And so you can see people kind of execute these ideas in unique ways where they can. And so I think that's part of it too, is that it's got to be methodical, and it's got to be.
When it comes to ecosystems and the homeostatic regulatory mechanisms of this planet, talking about scale of food production is almost, it's insulting to the idea of the only thing that can really scale, which is knowledge and ideas. I mean, I think understanding function is the thing that can scale, and that the food system then would inhabit the footprint that makes sense based on the understanding of that biosystem. And that's where I hope the conversation can go. And it's what I hope that, kind of operations like yours can help facilitate, because it is the most often asked question. And it is also the least interesting question in this whole puzzle is, how are you going to mass produce this? And it's sort of like the only thing that we really want to mass produce here is the facilitation of knowledge and understanding and patience and listening and all of those things. And I really to just kind of highlight the ecological model that you've sort of, I understand you, it's very adaptive, but you have a 7-year field vegetable rotation and you have a 10-year seasonal greenhouse. Could you talk about that and sort of how you've arrived there and how you listen and pay attention to kind of get to those places?
Absolutely. And just to say, I think the way you phrase that is beautifully said. Like that idea of like the scaling of the ideas and the concepts, right, to be applied in different ways in different places. It's absolutely right. So that really struck me. As far as the systems, I guess 20 years in as an organization, we have to go back to the fact that it's the systems that we've been running that are, again, they're collaborative in their own right. They're aggregates of the incredible wisdom of the past. And so that is the foundation that allows us to turn our attention towards being a research and innovation center, is because we believe now that these farming practices, these systems, and this respect and reverence for ecology, we have the system in which to jump off from. And so to talk about those systems, there's a number of different agricultural systems that are at play here. And I think that's really important, because that's the other thing. So when we're researching and doing research and innovation, some of it is, the food innovation. Some of it is also in the systems understanding, like I said. So we have different ag systems that we're also putting a scientific understanding to showcase over long periods of time their effectiveness. So for example, let's just go in the order you said. So first there's kind of a fairly typical 7-year organic vegetable crop rotation. And so we have a field, our main vegetable field, which is kind of if you've been here before, or if you come for a visit, it's kind of the iconic field right in front of the restaurant, up on this beautiful hillside. And it is a living example of a 7-year crop rotation that has 6 years of diverse family production and intermittent cover crops, and then 1 year of full cover crop rest. And that 1 year of rest is really interesting because it's not just cover crop a single, it's this diversity and the seasonality of diversity that is entered into it. So we might plant and mow 2 or 3 times in that year. So we're actually actively managing it, allowing it to recover before always these sections are always right before our biggest heavy feeder crop in a rotation. So something like, the brassica family, or the other one, which would be the tomatoes. And I guess not to make things confusing, but there's actually 2 7-year rotations working in parallel in that field. So that's one system that seems to be utilized all over the world, actually, in different iterations. So we want to explore that. And I've had some examples that honestly I could get emotional about in the moment of seeing the plan work, seeing what 7 years and a year can do, and coming back to seeing a crop that didn't thrive 7 years prior to thrive again because of the space and the time and all the activity in that space in between. It's an incredible thing. So that's one iteration. We test the soil. I think this is interesting too. We used to test the soil every 6 months. And then as we've learned about these soil health metrics, especially through a lab that we work with that we've really just find amazing, is the Woods End lab. And they have this soil health metric that they're using rather than just kind of a chemical analysis, but understanding the interplay in your soil. And so the peak time to do the soil testing is actually in that August range when the heat is highest and the microbiological activity is the highest. And that gives us a better understanding of our soils rather than taking it on the shoulder seasons when things are fairly dormant. So that system is being tested every August, and it's been running now. And so I guess the other things to add there are, so how do you run that? So there's that rotation, which I mentioned. The inputs to that system don't actually ever really involve direct animal inputs, but through the composted manure and the specific recipe and blend of compost that we apply to those systems. So that's usually animal manures and bedding, no wood chips or wood mulch, but straw bedding and animal manures, and then vegetable scraps and no animal carcasses. Not that you couldn't use them, but in this system, it's a very refined compost that we're putting onto our vegetable systems. So beyond that, we use what I still view as, and blows my mind every year, is this sprinkling of rock minerals and seaweed. And just the smallest amount can really create some of the most beautiful and delicious vegetables. So I think that's something really important in these systems that we do, is that it's either minimal input or it's no input. And in this one, it's a minimal max. You're talking about like a 1/4 inch of application to an area. It's a very minimal amount. And having that restraint comes from the incredible mentorship of this place. One of the things that I think is most amazing about Stone Barns is, so we're celebrating 20 years. The original farmer is still here, still overseeing and running these systems. And so to see that vision and that implementation, and be able to ask questions and to evolve, and also to follow that restraint of adding to the soil, is so important. Now, in fairness to everybody that's listening, it's like, that's very situational to our system, right? That addition is related to an understanding of our system through both the soil testing and through the experience. But other farms, when you're starting on more degraded soil, that might not be your reality in the short term. So it's all relative, and we're very aware of that. I don't know, I kind of took a while there, but I could explain a couple other.
Please do. No, I think this is like, we're all nerds here. So please give us the full skinny.
So for the vegetable side of things, you have this main vegetable field, and then we have this in-ground greenhouse, a 1/2 acre greenhouse that to me is essentially running like a no-till indoor system. And there, the additions to the soil go even lower. Because because in this enclosed, non-movable greenhouse, we don't get any of the effects of erosion. And so the organic matter is really high. And some of the early applications of compost have allowed us to reduce the amount of compost you can add to the soil now. So even there, we end up with kind of a similar balance of some rock minerals, seaweed, and some compost, but it's even more minimal than we get out in the main fields. It blows my mind to see how you create a different environment and then your soil conditions change. In there is a 10-year system that is moving block to block. And it's different because we're growing all 4 seasons. So some of the overwintering can kind of double up on crop families. So we're not always so rigid with like, it's 10 years before this family ever shows up again. But it's got to be situational. It's got to be the right time of year where the pest cycles wouldn't even be present. So things like the brassica family, which are so important from a financial perspective and a diversity perspective, there's just so many to choose from, and the market really gobbles them up. So being able to grow lots of turnips and radishes and mustard greens all throughout the fall, winter, and early spring, and then kind of like totally disappear from those in the summer, is a really important way of managing a closed system like that. So our pest pressure can vary, but we can be really tactical in trying to identify the times of planting. And one of the nice things is, as I mentioned, those brassicas, those turnips and radishes and mustards and, Gailan, broccoli robs, and these things that we just love, they really taste better at the seasons where the pest pressure is lowest. So for us, you can learn that just by eating it yourself, but it's almost like on the farm side of things, you can get stuck in kind of this, you need them at this time of year. And that's usually in like the spring or summer, but working closely with the chefs, getting that insight into being like, well, actually, like we don't want them any other time but this time. And so there's kind of a beautiful marriage there that really speaks to the Northeast, a differentiator. Why would anybody want to buy a radish from halfway around the world if the ones here taste so good in the winter? So that system's really unique because you have to be really careful not to add too much compost because the organic matter isn't being eroded away. And so we're really like light and methodical in the application there. Pest pressure comes up a lot in that rotation for people, and it's all about the tactical approach. So yes, planting at off seasons, especially if it's going to benefit the quality of the product, but then being tactical and being able to adjust during the high season when you have tomatoes and you're getting attacked by things like whitefly. There are just some realities that you can't get out of because that's the seasonality of it. So being able to move and being able to have a list of successional crops that are going to make back the loss that you might hit, because you don't want to let anything manifest in a space like that because we're never using synthetic chemicals or anything like that. So we can't, quote unquote, eradicate a situation without time. And so we act quickly when something comes up and we have a succession plan for that. The last thing I would mention in the greenhouse system is it's allowed us to explore crops that I think are really interesting. I just want to mention too, is I think, at least in the Northeast and the Northwest, a lot of growers have started to grow crops over the last 10 plus years, like ginger and turmeric and these things that could be really high value on the market, really medicinal, and also just different, right? You're growing these things and you're not dealing with the same pest pressures as your spinach and your lettuce and all these other things. So it's really unique to add in diversity like that. And it's proven those tropical crops in many of these areas to be really productive and effective and high value. So in working with the chefs here at Blue Hill and through the collaborations that they've brought to the table, we've also worked, with many chefs outside of more in the Blue Hill network and not directly with Blue Hill. And so we had a chef residency program back in 2021, and we were asked to try to grow bananas, even just for the leaf, which was an interesting request. And so right now our greenhouse is producing these incredible, like I've never in my life tasted bananas. And the reason I bring it up is just two things. One is we're not adding any supplemental heat other than you would to grow turnips and radishes. So we're keeping the temperature at like 35 to 40 degrees. We're just above freezing temperatures. And in order to get here, it goes back to a question you asked, which is like the examples of the collaboration. So the chefs requesting things and the conversation between the chefs and the farmers, and then the breeder or the farmer breeder out in Hawaii, an incredible farmer, Gabe Sachter Smith of Hawaii Banana Source, who is this incredible small-scale banana grower and banana breeder. And in working with him, we were able to identify a set of 9 genetics, some of his work and some that he recommended to try out in this greenhouse because they're more northern adapted mountainous varieties, dwarf varieties. And so what's something that could feel like a really ridiculous attempt turned out to be a successful attempt. And we were able to get 2 of the 9 varieties to produce well. And it's really an amazing thing. So just mentioning that we do, we're exploring the innovation and possibility of growing in a greenhouse along with doing the, typical production to make ends meet.
I want to taste the bananas.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, even when you're in Hawaii and you get the little apple bananas that are so extraordinary and just like, you never need to have another gigantic Dole banana after you've tasted one of those. And so, yeah, I envy you.
No, it's unbelievable. So that's a fun thing. And I just wanted to also make sure there was time to mention a system that I believe is going to continue to define Stone Barns' agricultural practices, which is a fully integrated, quote unquote, no input system, which is a lay rotation system, which is a term that I think is fairly commonly used. But this system is integrating the livestock program, the grain program, and the vegetable program all in one. And we don't add at this moment. We're doing this rotation. One of them can be 7 years, and one of them can be 10 years. We're exploring it, but we're actually studying the rotational system through a SARE grant. So now we're bringing in that ecological monitoring team, the crops team, the livestock team, and everybody's working together to both poke and prod at the system and to produce in the system. And that one's really interesting just because I think about the possibility of not needing to truck fertilization in, but instead to use things like animals and time and seed. And so that's something that we're going into the second year of study on, and that we want to expand. Maybe if anybody's listening and interested, to others that want to explore this, because we want to actually try to do a greater multi-farm study in 2026 and beyond. And I just think it could be a system that really comes to define the work that we're doing. So I just wanted to add that into and give credit to the livestock team as well, which is such a big part of what we're doing in managing, grasslands.
It's one of the main reasons I wanted to speak with you is that I work with a system in the northeastern corner of our state where it's a very isolated rural community. Anyway, it's mostly dominated by cattle ranching and grass seed production. But had this opportunity to sort of envision what it would look like to just have because COVID, I think, made everybody think for just a second about supply chain. And when stuff breaks down, when things really go south, and now we're starting to see, glimpses of how that might happen again real soon. And you think about, it wouldn't be that far-fetched, especially if the community is already fairly isolated, to be able to design a circular, basically a regional food system where the rotation is circular. And I got to imagine what those rotations would look like and how you'd have to overlap some that were 7 years, some that were 10 years. And this is a very drought limited ecosystem where the growing system is really, really marginal. But having like passively heated greenhouses that, produce biochar and things like that. And that was when I started looking at what you guys are doing and how awesome that is, because that's what I think when we talk about scaling, understanding, and the conceptual facilitation of getting people to understand that what you're doing is inspirational and is an idea that can be taken elsewhere, but not replicated everywhere. It's still those rotations are gonna have to be figured out. And it's I think about your, your day-to-day life, and it's such a cool thing to be able to collaborate with that many people who are really invested in trying to get a sense of, if everybody wanted to participate in this way, we not only could we feed ourselves, we could feed ourselves comfortably, abundantly, and so healthfully. And so if you have more to say about that, I would love for you to talk about that.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I totally agree with you. We can feed ourselves comfortably and abundantly. You put that right. But the only way to prove that is to create coordinated collaboration. Again, the baseline understanding of how systems work has to be there. These ideas are so far from the average person, but also the average farmer. Why? Because when I was mentioning, part of Stone Barns' importance to me is that we are a nonprofit and we are raising money to do things outside of the economic restraint there, to be able to do research that can be applied. But now, we spoke about a farm and a restaurant being low margin businesses. Well, what about 3 low margin farming businesses? Okay, you got grain operations, which need extremely large scale. You have animal operations, which can be tough, and vegetable operations. So So that doesn't mean there's any hope lost in there. It just means that you need, pioneering institutions, you need organizations, you need grant funding, you need individuals to be inspired to donate to causes to be able to understand how these systems work so that it doesn't have to be impossible to do it. But I think when I look at our systems and how all those pieces actually play such an important role, that we learned this from the kitchen team, from Dan, the chef, is like this a concept. Like we just did a fundraiser, and the concept was, if you want to eat this thing on your menu or on your table, you have to earn it, right? And that's something we don't have in our food system. You don't have to earn anything. You just have to go earn money to go buy whatever it is you want to buy at any point. But to really earn it is to go through the steps, the levels, right? You level up each time. And part of that in agriculture is the respect and understanding of how things interconnect. So in this instance, the grain production. So now we're talking about our lay rotation again. So the animals on pasture have paved the way for the grains to grow. And those grains are paving the way and creating a new order and establishing all sorts of different interconnectedness in that space for the vegetables to grow. If you pull any one of those things out and try to just run the system with 2 instead of 3 of the things in the system breaks down. It's like an electrical circuit. If it doesn't all connect, like, you're not going to get the power to switch on. And so that interconnection is so important. And so to be able to study that and prove it is a really important thing to our modern language. Again, like, technically, as a society, as a civilization, why would we need to prove something that was already proven? But we do, because it's not being enacted. And so the interconnectedness is super important. And I think one thing that I love in there, because we tried to, in our different iterations of trying these lay rotation systems, sometimes in the past, we'd maybe have like skipped a step or something. And you can just see the perennial nature of a pasture that animals are grazing on. It wants to stay that perennial pasture. And if you're trying to invite in something like an annual vegetable system, even if it's just going to be for a year, or even if it's with row crops, let's say, that perennial system is going to want to come back. So to break that cycle, you have to do something. You have to invite in, call it cover crops or call it grains and cover crops or whatever, but you need something to play, to create a boundary with enough time to allow your vegetables to grow properly without constantly fighting them, or what most large-scale farms want to do, which is just take the shortcut and use herbicides. So these are all systems that involve the system as the solution rather than the input as the solution. And 2 quick examples of that I think are interesting to share here are, we've taken this lay rotation system and not only are we studying its kind of interplay, but we've applied it on a large scale to another scientific study that we're just completing. Our 3rd year is about to come to a close. And this is a conversion system for the benefit of pasture lands and for the benefit of, let's say in this case, Northeast livestock farmers. So the idea is that this rotational system that involves this very specific succession of steps can allow for the establishment of a new pasture that could be climate resilient. And for the Northeast, the climate resilience we're looking for here, and I think many climates are looking for this in one way or another, is that at the hottest part of the summer in the Northeast, when the grasses, the cool season grasses that have dominated this landscape for, I don't know how long at this point, hundreds of years, they go dormant. And so that means that you're either supplementing your feed to your cattle or your sheep, or you are. That's pretty much what you're doing. And so if you can invite in a certain set of, in this case, native warm season grasses that can provide not just forage, but a thriving forage that actually can improve the diet of these animals at that time of year, well, that's saying something. And the only way to get there without the use of herbicides is through a systematic approach. And so we're using our lay rotation to try to identify if it can be applied for these conversions. So it's not just pasture, grain, vegetables, pasture, but pasture, grain, vegetables to a new pasture that has climate resilience added to it.
I also think, the warm season category in general in the Northeast, and especially where the sort of like incredible climatic reality of huge amounts of water coming at times when it didn't used to happen, that also helps on a appropriate regional scale helps regulate some of that, and how you could actually harvest it, like keep it where it falls. And that
100%.
over time, and not even over like geological time, like over time, really, especially if more and more of that is happening, kind of changes everything. And so I'm so appreciative. And I want to give you some space, because I know we've taken up a lot of your time, but I want to give you some space to just talk about anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get to say, or wanted to talk about that you didn't get to talk about. And also, if you don't mind, just because I think it's very, it's a way of sharing community with a lot of our audience, who I'm sure is just, very in awe of what you're doing, but also, kind of jealous of what you're able to do. But I think that the way that you acknowledge that being a nonprofit and being able to draw in like philanthropic dollars or donation money or whatever it is, that it is actually one of the only ways that we're ever going to change the game for, the people in our audience right now who are small, who are trying to do things at a size and a scale that is regionally suited, but not regionally supported because of the global system. So I just want to give you a little more, kind of bandwidth to be able to speak to that and anything else that you would like to say, because you've been just such a peach today for giving us all this time.
Yeah, thank you. Something that we've done in the last 3 to 5 years at Stone Barns is to transition our farm team from this transient apprentice-based system with constant turnover into something where we're actually investing in the farmers over the long term, or the medium term. The reason that's significant, I think, is because I think it's, from my experience as a farmer and as an observer, it is really difficult to just step out into a new piece of land and expect that land to produce for you right away. It's actually such an audacious thing that we think about, farming like we think about other businesses, because even though there is like that 3 to 5 year window for, most businesses to prove their effectiveness, like you don't know what you're getting into when if you get a new office, you're getting a Wi-Fi connection and things like that. And there's uncertainty, but like when you're cracking into a piece of land or you're taking over somebody else's piece of land, like you're taking over a lot of history there that you need time and space to make the right decisions. And I just want to say that like we and I like totally understand how hard that can be when you're starting in debt or you're starting with the clock ticking against you. It's a very difficult thing. We need to have support for farmers, because otherwise people are not going to choose this career path. So I do think it's, that's why I bring it up. Like for Stone Barns, we listened and we made an adjustment to invest in people to be able to support them over a number of seasons in learning these systems, to get a better understanding, to be able to learn how to adjust when the time comes for them to get their own land or to go manage other people's land, because those are kind of, it's never just one path. You kind of got to see what opportunity is out there and where you feel comfortable. So that was one thing to share. And I think that there's a lot of hope in the agricultural institutions. I think the more we as people in this society ask for ecological understanding, the more we talk about climate issues and the more we unfortunately face them, I think this inevitability of the pride in taking a career in nature-based work or agriculture it's not so shocking to the world when people are interested in these things. And I think in my short time in this industry, I think maybe I was just blind to it, but 15 years ago, it was weirder to go do this. And now I don't think it's the weirdest thing to pursue it, but I think it's still, unfortunately, almost just as difficult to make it. And so that's a start. That's the hope of it, is that like, this is not an unusual thing for people to want to engage in. So I think the future is actually trending in a really good direction, but we need that knowledge base and we need some examples. I think big institutions like land grant universities need to change, but I understand why they're slow to change. There's so much inertia there. And so you need little beacons of hope. You need great small farming communities, people willing to, to go and invest in their communities. I think for me, the Northwest, all the farms and seed producers and seed companies in Oregon was always an inspiration for me, and saying, why can't the Northeast be more like this? So you need these small communities making big strides, and you need nonprofits, and you need organizations to invest in, innovation in all the terms of that word.
Well, Jason, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you a little bit and getting to sort of vicariously get a sense of what your day-to-day looks like. And thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the spirit that you have in doing it. And I hope that we get to meet in real life someday. And I wish you all the best with the rest of your your season never ends. So I'm just excited for whatever you're going to do next. And thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you. And thank you for what you're doing too. I mean, I just want to say one other thing, that like podcasts like yours, and, just for all those farming and like really just doing the work and getting out there and being in those cucumber tunnels and just the endless hours, like being able to hear the stories from other farmers, being able to connect with people, to learn, to make what you're doing more than just that harvest. I mean, like those are amazing. These are amazing resources for people. So I just appreciate that too, having benefited from it for so long. So just thanks for that.
Awesome. Well, have a great day, and we'll see you at Stone Barns, we hope.
Please do.
Thanks, everyone, for joining my conversation with Jason Grauer today. What an eloquent, but also very fortunate human being. And how lovely was it that we got to experience a little sliver of what Stone Barns is doing, even though many of us will never have the great fortune of dining there. I think we could all probably be welcomed with open arms if we wanted to visit the center. And I highly recommend, if you are in the area, that you do so, because it really is a unique experience, a beautiful one, and an inspiring one. And like many of you, really appreciate the work that is being done there, because they have a very, as we spoke to, a very privileged position, and they are not squandering that or taking it for granted. I also want to just thank my my other co-hosts and the folks behind the scenes at the No-Till Growers podcast network, which is ever growing, and how inspired I am by all of the work that everyone is doing. And lastly, just one more thanks to you all for coming along for the ride. We appreciate you so much, and we pull our oars with you.
All right, we hope you enjoyed that episode. Always make sure to check the links in the show notes for how to follow our guests and hosts. The No-Till Market Garden podcast is a free show that is supported by folks like you who contribute every month over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. That support helps ensure all the shows we do, from the Seed Farmer podcast to the Winter Growers podcast, the Collaborative Farming podcast, the Composter podcast, Growers Daily, and of course the No-Till Market Garden podcast, can continue to go and grow. You can also find books and hats, as well as an active forum over at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge thank you to editor Michael Sellis and producer Jackson Roulette for all their work on this show and the rest of the team over at no-tillgrowers.com. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and make sure you are subscribed wherever you're hearing this so you don't miss the next episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. See you then.